Welcome to The Least You Should Know. The least you should know about the literature of exploration. You know, they say that every picture tells a story, and if this is the case, then certainly this image, Columbus among the Indians, in fact tells a very important story, one that I think will inform our reading in this first unit. What do you notice in this picture? You may, for example, focus on this central image of Columbus standing, dare I say, almost levitating, right? Amid this circle of characters, right? Many of whom are Native Americans, but certainly we see some of Columbus's cohorts with him, don't we? Notice the stark contrast, right, between the way the Europeans are depicted. They are, right? Well, they are clothed, right, and they have armor. Look at the natives, right, all in poses of submission or supplication. They are, well, scantily clad, right? So the image, doesn't it, shows quite a clash of civilizations, a clash of cultures. We see the mother, young mother, Native American, on the lower left hand with her infant child, sort of raising the infant up, right, to this Columbus, this godlike figure, right? So it's so interesting, isn't it, to see how these cultures are represented. And what the art itself has to show us or to tell us about those who created the art and how they perceived themselves and how they perceived the other, as we will see, not only in this sort of visual rhetoric, but within the texts of these stories, we will see the basic story here being played out over and over again as we look at some of these early European explorer and then English explorers' accounts of their interactions with the Native Americans who inhabited the New World. So here you see a list of key figures, key individuals who were adventurers and explorers of European descent, English descent, French descent, and you can see there are quite a few. And again, this is only a representative sample. We're not going to read all of these. Really, we're going to be looking at, I think, two in this first unit. At least this semester, we're going to be looking at Columbus and Cabeza de Vaca. So listen, I have a few slides. I'm just going to give you some data points that correspond to some historical events. And again, I'm not going to quiz you on these key dates, but the spirit of the dates and the information contained in the next few slides is just to give you sort of a context, a little reminder of what has been happening leading up to the exploration of North America by the English and by the European. Here you see 1300, rise of the Aztec Empire. The bubonic plague makes its first appearance around 1347, and 1492, Columbus sails the ocean blue, right? And he, quote, discovers America. We'll talk more about that when we get to Columbus. So this is where things sort of begin to get interesting. Look at this. We get this guy named Cabeza de Vaca, who travels from Spain through Florida, all through the southern tier of North America, and ends up down in Mexico. An 8-year expedition. We're going to read some Cabeza de Vaca. He was a very, very interesting cat. Look at Drake, Sir Francis Drake, claiming California coast for Elizabeth in 1579. Pretty bold move, right? And then 1585, Menendez establishes St. Augustine, Florida, for the Spanish. And St. Augustine, Florida, as some of you may know, is the earliest, the oldest inhabited colony and then city in North America. We don't really study it that much in America because it was the Spanish who did it. We always like to claim Jamestown with Captain John Smith, who we'll get to later, because Jamestown represents the first permanent English colony in the New World. But the Spanish were here before us, and their legacy is, in fact, felt there at St. Augustine, Florida. Now, here are two items you may see on a quiz. Look at this, 1584 Roanoke. This is a fascinating story. I don't know if you've ever heard about the lost colony of Roanoke, but if you want to go down a very interesting rabbit hole, check out Roanoke, the colony at Roanoke on the internet. It was the first effort that was made by the English. This is during Queen Elizabeth's reign to establish a colony in America. And it certainly still is one of America's mysteries. The colony was found abandoned in 1590. None of the occupants were found alive. There was only a cryptic carving in a tree. And there are all sorts of theories about what happened to these early English settlers. Crazy stuff, from being abducted by UFOs, aliens from outer space, to natives, Americans killing them, some of them succumbing to disease. But it's a very, very interesting story. Roanoke was situated off the coast of North Carolina, if I'm remembering correctly. But listen, 1607, Jamestown is the first permanent English settlement in the New World, and certainly the individual who we will read most associated with Jamestown is Captain John Smith. So be familiar with what Roanoke was, and certainly that Jamestown was founded in 1607 and most associated with Captain John Smith. Okay, some key facts about the period. Listen, so much of these expeditions and these adventurers and explorers, so much of this activity took place during this historic era known as the Renaissance, right? And the Renaissance is a fascinating period in the development of Western civilization and in human history, and is really really one of the direct causes for North America being explored and then eventually colonized. But during this period, really what we see are the rise of monarchies and the rise of the merchant class. This is in Europe, okay? And so monarchies provided these adventurers and these explorers with the financial capital and the human resources to undertake these expeditions. And certainly they wanted to expand their empires, they wanted return on their investment, and then also simultaneously we have a merchant class emerging in the European countries who were looking to find new trading opportunities, especially with the Far East. One of the most important facts to remember about the literature of exploration is that these authors were first and foremost navigators and explorers. They were not writers. Say that again with me. Read it to yourself. Remember this, right? These authors, they weren't writers. They did not think of themselves as authors or writers in the traditional sense that we would today in the 21st century, right? It wasn't like John Grisham woke up and said, hey, I'm going to go to the New World, right? And I'm going to write an account of this. No, these individuals were adventurers. They were explorers. They were mercenaries in some cases. And so you have to remember this when you sit down to read it. So cut them a little slack, is what I'm trying to say, right? You'll see them struggling sometimes to find the right word for new things they encountered because they were interacting with a landscape, with a people, with flora and fauna that they had never really encountered before. Okay, so you sometimes will see them grasping, sort of struggling to describe what it is that they are seeing. They often rely on superlatives and comparisons to things to which they knew that their readers could relate to. Okay, so this is so important. I can't stress this point enough. You have to remember that the authors that we're reading here, if you think, God, these guys, this is so terrible, yes, right? Because they were not wordsmithing their text, right? This was, in so many instances, this is intelligence. What they're trying to do, they're trying to gather up for the monarchs who sent them, right? All the information that they have, that they think that they would be interested in back home in Europe or in England. Two other key facts about this literature of exploration. These writers wrote for a specific audience. More often than not, this audience was their investors. Okay? So what we'll see more often than not is a tone that is generally positive, right? And this is important because what they're maybe I'm reading too much into this, but a positive report would help them justify their funding and certainly help establish a pretext for their next mission. Because look, if you're an adventurer, or if you're an explorer, if you're Columbus, you're Cabeza de Vaca, you're Champlain or Richard Hakluyt, or so many of these others, the thing, Captain John Smith, the thing that you want more than anything else is to explore, right? And to go out on another mission. So you see their tone being oftentimes just sort of over the top, just these glowing reports of the potential there, the resources that are seem to be up for the taking. Immediately, we see these authors describing or presenting the potential of what became and what becomes known as the American dream. Time and again, we see in these accounts writers describing and speaking of potential wealth, of the natural resources, lumber, the fisheries, and so forth. And of course, they're looking for gold too. Now, of course, we know now they don't find any gold. That's a whole other story. But we also see them speaking of spiritual regeneration as well, sometimes more often than not through the conversion of the heathen Indian or the heathen Native American to, of course, their Western Christianity. Okay, and we can unpack that as we go through the text together, right? Okay, two final facts about the literature of exploration. You will detect quite quickly that these authors regard the Native Americans as being innately inferior. Okay, and again, we're 21st enlightened readers, and so as we engage these texts and read these accounts of Europeans interacting with Native Americans, we can certainly see how ignorant and how hypocritical their activities and their attitudes are and how ignorant they seem to be. But we must remember that this was centuries ago. But you will see, as a result of their continuously looking at the Native American as being inferior, The effects of this is that they see the New World, as North America soon becomes known as in these texts, as theirs for the taking, and theirs to dominate, not only physically, spiritually, but culturally as well. This left a firm imprint on colonial and later American consciousness. Okay, so this is a key fact that underpins this literature of exploration, and be on the lookout for it. As I said, you won't have to look too hard. You'll find it. Literature of exploration also is history in the making. The reports are not necessarily accurate. Again, these explorers had a limited perspective, and we'll talk about this when we get into the whole concept of authorship and how reliable some of these texts can be, particularly when we get to a cat like, well, Cabeza de Vaca early on, and then I think mostly about Captain John Smith and his sort of limitations. And then also finally remember that history, cultural anthropology, and literature, these were not their prime concerns. Go back to that idea a few slides ago about remembering and trying to remember that their audience it was not you and was certainly not me, and their objectives, right? Remember, their audience is their investors, their stakeholders, their monarchs who are funding their expeditions. Their objectives are to gather as much intelligence about the potential for colonization and the potential for trade and the potential to essentially capitalize on the natural resources that the New World provided. Let's look at what we might refer to as the collective paradigm or the prevailing mindset of the English and certainly the European nations as a whole. And if we could think of these as sort of the prevailing attitudes, the law of nations and the New World, they would believe that these lands were not inhabited because they were not inhabited by civilized people, right? And again, you can sort of, it's very easy to detect this disparaging and quite ignorant viewpoint of the Native Americans who were there, right, and very much had a civilization and very much had a deep and rich culture of traditions. The Europeans believed that they had the natural rights to do two things: trade and spread the gospel of Christianity. Okay, so remember that. You might see some of these on the quiz, so be familiar with the law of nations. And to do these two things, to trade and to spread the gospel of Christianity, they needed settlements, and war was always justified in the minds of the English and the Europeans, and conquest was justified as an ends, as a means to these ends. Christians had a moral and legal right to end cannibalism and human sacrifices, both of which they encountered, and war was justified to do this. Natives were hunters and gatherers, and the European cultural viewpoint would hold that the English and European coming in colonies, could cultivate the land and feed more people. And this was sort of an innate obligation of human beings imposed by nature. Okay, so the law of nations in the New World. Some quick reading tips. I want you to work on becoming better at being an active reader and really engaging with the text. What I mean by this is that when you sit down to read, that you've got a pen, a highlighter in your hands, and that you are highlighting and annotating to the best of your ability, right, these texts, so that when it comes time to look up something again that you found interesting as you are going through your notes to study for quizzes and exams, that you have a text that reflects your reading of it, that you simply just didn't read through it in one ear, out the other, but in fact that you have a text that you have, again, interacted with in a meaningful way, where you've highlighted passages that you find significant, interesting, revealing in light of what we've been talking about, not only this morning, but in future videos as well. Always, number 2, always read the introductions to the authors. I will assign these to you. I want you to read them. I expect you to read them. I will quiz you on information that I find in these introductions. And then always look up unfamiliar words. Okay, this is college, university now, and so you can't just kind of gloss over words you don't really know. I mean, you can look for context clues and so forth, but you know, you're on the road to becoming a college-educated person. And college-educated people work and strive to expand their vocabulary, right, and to learn more. I'm psyched out of my mind about this class. I can't wait to work with you, and I'm going to let you go now. If you made it through this slide, good for you. I try to keep them under 20 minutes. Sometimes I can do it, sometimes I can't. Sometimes I just get carried away. All right, let me know if you have any questions. Bye.